The mahogany conference table stretched between us like a battleground, polished to mirror perfection under the crystal chandelier. Across from me sat Victoria, my older sister, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her designer handbag, while her attorney whispered urgently in her ear. The trust fund documents lay scattered between us, thick cream paper, bearing the Wellington family seal that had governed our lives for 3 generations. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. You've always been delusional, Claire. Victoria's voice cut through the tension like shattered glass. Grandmother's trust was meant for someone who could handle responsibility, someone who earned their place in this family. Her emerald eyes, so similar to mine yet cold where mine burned with determination, fixed on me with the same dismissive look I'd received my entire life. What Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent the last 6 months uncovering a truth that would shatter everything she believed about her birthright, about our family, and about the fortune she'd been spending so freely. The real Wellington Trust had been hidden in plain sight for 23 years. Protected by legal language she'd never bothered to read, secured by conditions she'd never bothered to meet. As her attorney cleared his throat and began reading the settlement terms that would supposedly divide our grandmother's legacy, I touched the manila envelope in my briefcase. Inside lay documents that would prove Victoria had been living a lie funded by money that was never legally hers. The irony was perfect. The sister who called me worthless was about to discover she was the one with no claim at all. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my modest apartment in Portland's Pearl District, casting geometric shadows across the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself 2 summers ago. I stretched against the Egyptian cotton sheets, a rare indulgence from my consulting income, and reached for my phone to silence the alarm. Tuesday, October 15th. Another day of building other people's businesses, while mine remained a carefully guarded dream. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed the same features that marked me as a Wellington: sharp cheekbones, deep-set green eyes, auburn hair that caught light like spun copper. But where Victoria carried herself with the entitled confidence of old money, I'd learned to make my way quietly, competently, without drawing attention to the family name that opened doors I preferred to earn my way through. The coffee maker gurgled to life as I reviewed my calendar. 3 client calls before lunch, then the drive to Hillsborough for the monthly family dinner at the estate. These gatherings had become a careful dance over the years, me arriving with homemade focaccia and updates about my modest successes, Victoria sweeping in with stories of European vacations and charity galas funded by what everyone assumed was her generous trust fund distribution. I pulled my navy blazer from the closet, the one I'd bought at Nordstrom Rack, and had tailored to fit perfectly. Details mattered in my consulting work. When you're advising tech startups on operational efficiency, credibility comes from competence, not connections. My clients knew me as Claire Wellington, the woman who could streamline their processes and cut their overhead by 30%, not as the granddaughter of Margaret Wellington, whose shipping fortune had built half of downtown Portland. The commute to my shared office space in the brewery blocks took 23 minutes by bike, a route I'd perfected to avoid both traffic and the financial district, where Victoria's investment firm occupied 3 floors of gleaming steel and glass. She'd inherited, or so we all believed, the bulk of grandmother's trust when she turned 25, while I'd received what the family attorney called a modest provision that barely covered my college expenses. My first client call was with Marcus Chen, a brilliant engineer whose food delivery app was hemorrhaging money on inefficient routing. We'd been working together for 6 months, and his metrics had improved dramatically. "Claire, you're a magician," he said as we reviewed the quarterly reports. "We're actually profitable now. When are you going to start your own firm instead of making everyone else rich?" The question stung because I'd been asking myself the same thing for 3 years. I had the expertise, the track record, the vision for how modern businesses should operate. What I lacked was the capital to take the leap, to rent office space, hire staff, and weather the inevitable lean months of building a client base. The startup capital I needed, $200,000, might as well have been $2 million given my current financial reality. Between calls, I allowed myself 15 minutes to scroll through the business plan I'd been refining in secret. Wellington Operational Solutions would specialize in sustainable efficiency for growing companies, combining the analytical rigor I'd learned at Stanford with the practical wisdom that came from watching businesses succeed and fail. The mock-up logo sat in the corner of my screen, elegant serif letters that honored our family tradition while looking toward the future. Victoria would laugh if she knew about my entrepreneurial dreams. During last month's family dinner, she'd made her feelings clear when Uncle Robert asked about my plans. "Claire's always been content with small ambitions," she'd said, cutting her prime rib with surgical precision. "Some people are meant to work for others, and there's dignity in that." The words had landed like physical blows, especially coming from someone whose biggest decision each day was which charity luncheon to attend. The afternoon client calls blurred together, a sustainable clothing brand struggling with inventory management, a craft brewery whose distribution network needed optimization, a meditation app whose user acquisition costs were unsustainable. Each conversation reminded me how much I loved solving complex problems, finding elegant solutions that others missed. My reputation was growing steadily through referrals and LinkedIn recommendations. But steady wasn't enough when you were competing with consultants from McKinsey and Bain who could wine and dine clients with expense accounts I couldn't dream of matching. At 5:30, I locked my bike to the rack outside my building and climbed the stairs to my apartment. The shower washed away the day's frustrations, replaced by the familiar knot of anxiety that preceded every family gathering. These dinners were performances where I played the role of the grateful younger sister, appreciative of whatever crumbs fell from the family table. The reality was more complicated. I genuinely loved my grandmother's memory and felt obligated to maintain traditions that connected me to something larger than myself. The drive to Hillsborough took 45 minutes through evening traffic, my Honda Civic looking modest among the luxury vehicles that would inevitably fill the estate's circular driveway. The Wellington house sat on 12 acres of manicured grounds, a Tudor Revival mansion that had been featured in Architectural Digest twice during grandmother's lifetime. Even after 5 years of monthly visits, the sight of it took my breath away. Leaded glass windows glowing like jewels, ivy climbing the stone walls with practiced elegance, gardens that required a full-time staff to maintain their perfection. Victoria's white Tesla was already parked near the front entrance, precisely positioned to catch the light from the carriage lamps. She'd arrived early, as always, to spend time alone with Uncle Robert and ensure her version of family news was heard first. This pattern had established itself years ago, leaving me to arrive like an afterthought to conversations already in progress. I parked beside the service entrance and retrieved the focaccia from my passenger seat, still warm from my oven and fragrant with rosemary I'd grown in my apartment's herb garden. Cooking had become my way of contributing something personal to these gatherings, a skill that couldn't be bought with trust fund money. The kitchen staff always complimented my efforts, though I suspected they were instructed to make everyone feel welcome. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper who'd worked for our family for 30 years, greeted me at the side door with genuine warmth. "Miss Claire, how lovely to see you. Your focaccia smells divine. I'll make sure it's served with the first course." She'd known me since childhood, had been the one to bandage scraped knees and celebrate small victories when my parents were too busy with their diplomatic careers to pay attention. The familiar sounds of family conversation drifted from the dining room. Uncle Robert's booming laugh, Victoria's musical voice describing some recent triumph, the clink of crystal glasses being filled with wine from the estate's private collection. I smoothed my blazer, checked my reflection in the hallway mirror, and prepared to step into the performance that had defined our family dynamic for as long as I could remember. What I didn't know as I walked toward that warm, well-lit room where Victoria held court like a queen among her subjects was that this dinner would be the last time I played the role of grateful recipient of family generosity. Hidden in legal files I'd never seen, protected by language I'd never understood, lay the truth about grandmother's legacy, a truth that would transform everything I believed about my place in the Wellington family hierarchy. The dining room chandelier cast its familiar golden glow over the mahogany table set for 4, but something felt different tonight. Uncle Robert sat at the head of the table where grandmother used to preside, his silver hair perfectly styled despite being 72. Victoria occupied the seat to his right, her black Hermes dress complementing the antique chairs as if she'd been born to grace this room. I took my usual place across from her, next to the empty chair that had belonged to our parents before their diplomatic posting to Singapore made these dinners a transatlantic impossibility. "Claire, you look tired," Victoria observed, her voice carrying just enough concern to sound caring while delivering the criticism. "Are you getting enough sleep? I know how demanding your little consulting business must be." Before I could respond, Uncle Robert raised his wine glass, the crystal catching the light like liquid amber. "To family traditions," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 generations of Wellington dinners. "Margaret would be pleased to see us maintaining her values." We clinked glasses, the sound echoing off the oil paintings of stern-faced Wellington ancestors who seemed to judge our worthiness from their gilded frames. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I sat, the granddaughter struggling to build something meaningful, while Victoria basked in inherited wealth and called my efforts little. The first course arrived with the precision that marked every family gathering: butternut squash soup, garnished with truffle oil, served alongside my focaccia, which had been artfully arranged on bone china. Mrs. Patterson supervised the service with the same attention to detail she'd maintained since grandmother's time, ensuring each element met the standards expected in the Wellington dining room. "Robert, I've been meaning to discuss the Foundation's upcoming gala," Victoria said, dabbing her lips with the monogrammed linen napkin. "We need to increase the ticket prices if we're going to make a real impact this year. I'm thinking $500 per plate instead of $350. Uncle Robert nodded approvingly. "Excellent thinking. The Astors raised their prices last year and had record attendance. People equate cost with exclusivity." I listened to their conversation about charity galas and auction items, about which vineyard produced the best Pinot Noir for donor appreciation events, about the politics of Portland's social elite. This was Victoria's world, a realm of influence and philanthropy where decisions were made over champagne and problems were solved with checkbooks. My own work, helping businesses become more efficient and sustainable, seemed almost quaint by comparison. "How's your consulting going, Claire?" Uncle Robert asked, his attention turning to me with the polite interest reserved for family obligations. "Still working with those technology companies?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "It's going well," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "I'm actually thinking about expanding into my own firm. There's a real need for operational efficiency consulting in the startup ecosystem." Victoria's laugh was silver and sharp. "Oh, Claire, you've been talking about starting your own business for years. At some point, you have to stop dreaming and accept reality. Not everyone is cut out for entrepreneurship." The words hit their intended target, but instead of the usual sting of humiliation, I felt something else, a flicker of anger that surprised me with its intensity. "Actually, I have a solid business plan and strong client relationships. The only thing missing is startup capital." "Capital," Victoria repeated, as if the word amused her. "Yes, I suppose that would be a challenge on a consultant's salary. Have you considered taking out a loan? Banks love ambitious young women these days." Uncle Robert cleared his throat, a sound that had signaled topic changes throughout my childhood. "Speaking of business, I had an interesting conversation with Harold Morrison at the club yesterday. His firm is looking for operational consultants. Claire, you might want to reach out to him." The suggestion was kindly meant, but it reinforced the same pattern that had defined my entire life, being directed toward opportunities others deemed appropriate for my station. I was 28 years old, held an MBA from Stanford, and had built a reputation for excellence in my field. Yet I was still being treated like a recent graduate who needed guidance from family connections. As the main course arrived, herb-crusted salmon with seasonal vegetables, Victoria launched into a detailed account of her recent trip to Napa Valley. She described the private tastings, the exclusive dinners with winemakers, the weekend at a luxury resort where she'd networked with venture capitalists and hedge fund managers. Each detail felt like a small blade, cutting away at my sense of self-worth. The most fascinating conversation was with James Whitmore from Sequoia Capital. She continued, her eyes bright with the enthusiasm reserved for truly expensive experiences. "He's looking for investment opportunities in sustainable technology. It's become quite fashionable, apparently." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Sustainable technology was exactly the sector where my clients were making their biggest impacts. The meditation app I'd helped optimize had reduced their server costs by 40% while improving user experience. The sustainable clothing brand had cut their waste stream by 60% through better inventory management. These weren't just operational improvements. They were the kind of environmental impacts that attracted serious investment. That's interesting, I said carefully. Did he mention what specific criteria he's looking for? Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Oh, you know how these venture capital types talk. Revenue metrics, scalability potential, management teams with track records. Nothing you'd need to worry about. The casual dismissal landed differently this time. Instead of accepting it as a natural family hierarchy, I found myself analyzing her words with the same critical thinking I applied to client problems. Why was Victoria so quick to dismiss my expertise? Why did she seem invested in keeping me small, dependent, grateful for whatever scraps of opportunity fell my way? After dinner, Uncle Robert excused himself to take a phone call from Tokyo, some matter requiring immediate attention despite the time difference. Victoria and I found ourselves alone in the library, surrounded by leather-bound volumes that had witnessed generations of Wellington family discussions. The fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the Persian rug where I'd played as a child during visits to grandmother. You seem different tonight, Victoria observed, settling into one of the wingback chairs with her brandy snifter. More argumentative than usual. I wouldn't call it argumentative, I replied, choosing my words carefully. Maybe I'm just more aware of my own capabilities. She studied me over the rim of her glass, her green eyes calculating. Claire, I hope you're not developing unrealistic expectations. Family money comes with responsibilities that not everyone can handle. Grandmother understood that when she structured the trust the way she did. There it was, the subtle reminder of our financial hierarchy, delivered with the practiced ease of someone who'd never questioned her right to luxury. But something in her tone caught my attention, a note of defensiveness that seemed disproportionate to my mild assertion of competence. I've never asked for family money, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. Everything I've accomplished I've done on my own. Quote, Of course you have, Victoria replied, but her smile didn't reach her eyes, and that's admirable truly. But let's be realistic about what's possible without proper resources. Some dreams are just too expensive for people in your position. The phrase, people in your position, echoed in my mind as I drove home through the dark streets of Hillsborough. When had I become someone whose position was inherently limited? When had my sister appointed herself the guardian of family resources, the arbiter of who deserved what level of opportunity? Back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my window overlooking the city lights. Portland stretched out below me, full of entrepreneurs and dreamers who'd built something from nothing, who'd turned ideas into empires without the benefit of trust funds or family connections. The thought that had been nagging at me all evening finally crystallized into something concrete. I walked to my desk and pulled out the laptop, scrolling through my saved documents, until I found the folder labeled Family Financials. Over the years, I'd kept careful records of the family's philanthropic activities, partly out of curiosity, and partly because Uncle Robert occasionally asked for my input on operational efficiency for the Foundation's programs. The Wellington Foundation gave away nearly $1 million annually, funding everything from arts education to environmental conservation. As I reviewed the Foundation's tax filings, something caught my attention. The funding source was listed as, quote, Wellington Family Trust, Principal Distributions. But in the margins of one document, there was a handwritten note, in Uncle Robert's careful script, Verified Distribution Authority per Original Trust Instrument, Section 7.3.2. I stared at the notation, my pulse quickening. Why would Uncle Robert need to verify distribution authority? Wouldn't Victoria's position as primary beneficiary make such distributions automatic? And what was Section 7.3.2 of the original trust instrument? For the first time in years, I found myself questioning the financial arrangements I'd always accepted as immutable family fact. The more I thought about Victoria's defensive reaction to my business ambitions, her quick dismissal of my capabilities, her insistence on maintaining our relative positions, the more I wondered what she might be protecting. Outside my window, the city hummed with late-night energy, food trucks serving hungry workers, Coffee shops staying open for insomniacs and dreamers? Startup offices where entrepreneurs worked through the night to build their visions. Somewhere in that maze of ambition and possibility, there might be answers to questions I'd never thought to ask. The Wellington Family Trust had governed our lives for 3 generations, but I'd never seen the actual documents. I had accepted Victoria's superiority as a natural law, like gravity or the changing seasons. But what if the law I'd been living under wasn't natural at all? What if it was just a story I'd been told so many times that I'd stopped questioning its truth? I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Amanda Torres, a law school classmate who now specialized in estate planning and trust administration. We'd kept in touch sporadically over the years, exchanging holiday cards and occasional coffee meetings when our schedules aligned. The text I sent was carefully casual. "Hey Amanda, hope you're well. Quick question about trust law interpretation. Would love to catch up soon if you have time." As I hit send, something shifted inside me, a small crack in the foundation of assumptions that had shaped my entire adult life. Tomorrow, I would start asking questions I'd never considered asking. Tonight, I would allow myself to imagine that the answers might change everything. Amanda Torres met me at Powell's Books. 3 days later, her briefcase tucked under her arm as she navigated through the maze of literary treasures that made the iconic bookstore a perfect cover for sensitive conversations. We'd chosen the Blue Room on the 2nd floor, surrounded by travel guides and language learning materials that provided natural background noise for discussions better kept private. "Trust law can be incredibly complex," Amanda said, stirring honey into her coffee as we settled into a corner table. Her dark hair was pulled back in the same no-nonsense style she'd favored in law school, but the designer suit and confident demeanor spoke to her success in Portland's competitive legal market. Family trusts especially, because they often involve multiple generations and changing circumstances. I'd spent 2 sleepless nights preparing for this conversation, crafting questions that seemed casual, while digging for information I desperately needed. "I'm curious about distribution authority," I began, keeping my voice neutral. "If someone is listed as the primary beneficiary of a trust, does that automatically mean they control all distributions?" Amanda's eyebrows rose slightly. "Not necessarily. It depends entirely on how the trust was structured. Some trusts give beneficiaries broad discretion, while others require specific conditions to be met. Age requirements, educational achievements, marital status, even behavioral clauses. I've seen trusts that required beneficiaries to maintain sobriety or pursue certain careers." My coffee grew cold as I absorbed this information. What about documentation? Would beneficiaries typically have access to the original trust documents? Absolutely. Any beneficiary has the right to review the complete trust instrument, all amendments, and regular accounting statements showing distributions and investment performance. Amanda studied my face carefully. "Claire, is everything okay? These seem like very specific questions." I hesitated, weighing the risks of revealing too much against the growing certainty that I needed professional guidance. "I'm trying to understand my family's trust better. I've never actually seen the original documents, and some things aren't adding up." Amanda's expression shifted to professional concern. "How long has it been since you received a formal accounting?" "Trust law requires regular reporting to all beneficiaries, typically annual statements showing income, expenses, and distributions." "I've never received anything like that," I admitted, feeling foolish for never questioning this absence. "Victoria handles all the trust matters." I assumed she was more qualified because she studied finance. "Claire," Amanda said gently, "beneficiary qualification isn't about education or expertise. It's about legal rights established when the trust was created. If you're a named beneficiary, you have specific entitlements that can't be waived by family convenience or someone else's financial background." The next morning, I canceled my client calls and drove to the Multnomah County Courthouse, where public records might hold pieces of the puzzle I was assembling. The probate court clerk, a patient woman named Janet, who'd clearly dealt with confused family members before, helped me navigate the filing system. "Wellington Trust," she murmured, typing into her computer. "Margaret Helena Wellington, deceased October 2019. Here we go. Initial filing, amendments, final settlement." She pulled up screens of legal documents, dates, and case numbers blurring together. What specifically are you looking for? The original trust instrument, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'm a beneficiary, but I've never seen the actual document. Janet's fingers clicked across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Original trust was filed in 1998, but there are several amendments. The most recent significant change was, June 2001. That's when the distribution structure was modified. I would have been 6 years old, Victoria 12. What circumstances would have prompted changes to grandmother's carefully structured legacy? Could I get copies of everything? I asked, pulling out my credit card for the copying fees. Of course. Fair warning, though. Trust documents can be dense reading. You might want to have an attorney review them with you. 2 hours later, I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot with a manila envelope containing 47 pages of legal documentation that would either confirm my suspicions or prove my growing paranoia unfounded. My hands shook as I opened the folder, scanning the formal language that began with Margaret Helena Wellington, being of sound mind and disposing memory. The original 1998 trust was straightforward. Grandmother had divided her estate between her 2 granddaughters equally, with distributions beginning at age 25. Both Victoria and I were named as co-beneficiaries with identical rights and responsibilities. But the 2001 amendment told a different story entirely. I read the modification 3 times before its implications were fully registered. The amendment didn't change the beneficiary structure. It added conditions for distribution authority. According to the new language, the primary distribution authority would transfer to whichever granddaughter first met a specific set of criteria: completion of a 4-year college degree, demonstration of financial responsibility through 3 years of steady employment, and maintenance of a clean credit record. But there was more. The amendment included what lawyers call a sunset clause. If neither granddaughter met the criteria by age 30, distribution authority would revert to the trust's original equal structure. Victoria turned 32 years ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chen. Claire, we need to reschedule tomorrow's strategy session. Investor meeting moved up. Sorry for short notice. I stared at the message, realizing that while I'd been accepting scraps from family dinners, I'd built a consulting practice that attracted serious investors. The irony was becoming impossible to ignore. I drove home through downtown Portland, my mind racing through implications I was only beginning to understand. If Victoria had never met the criteria established in the 2001 amendment, if she'd somehow been accessing trust funds without proper authority, then every family dinner, every dismissive comment about my modest lifestyle, every reminder of my supposed inferiority had been built on a foundation of lies. That evening, I spread the trust documents across my dining table like evidence in a criminal investigation. Using colored highlighters, I marked every relevant section: beneficiary rights, distribution requirements, reporting obligations, and amendment procedures. The pattern that emerged was damning. According to the trust's requirements, Victoria should have been providing me with annual accounting statements since I turned 25 3 years ago. She should have transferred distribution authority when she failed to meet the criteria by her 30th birthday. Most importantly, any distributions made without proper authority would constitute a breach of fiduciary duty, a serious legal violation that could result in personal liability for misappropriated funds. I pulled out my laptop and began creating a spreadsheet, documenting every family event where Victoria had displayed wealth that supposedly came from the trust. The European vacations, the designer wardrobe, the luxury car, the charitable donations made in the Wellington name. If she wasn't legally entitled to primary distribution authority, where had this money come from? My search through the Foundation's public filings revealed the first concrete evidence of irregularities. The Wellington Foundation's annual report listed Victoria as, quote, trust administrator, and showed distributions totaling $2.3 million over the past 5 years. But according to the trust documents I'd just obtained, no single beneficiary had authority to make distributions of that magnitude without co-beneficiary approval or court oversight. I reached for my phone and called Amanda, knowing she'd be working late at her firm. I need to hire you, I said without preamble when she answered. I found the trust documents, and I think my sister has been stealing from me for years. Amanda's voice was carefully controlled. Don't say anything else over the phone. Can you be at my office tomorrow morning at 8? Bring everything you found, and don't discuss this with anyone in your family. The next morning, Amanda's conference room felt like a war room as we spread the trust documents across the polished table. She'd brought her paralegal, Lisa, who specialized in financial forensics and had already begun creating timeline charts based on the information I'd provided. This is worse than I thought, Amanda said after reviewing the key documents. If these distributions were made without proper authority, we're not just talking about family disputes. We're talking about potential criminal fraud. Lisa looked up from her laptop, where she'd been cross-referencing foundation filings with trust distribution requirements. The pattern is systematic. Victoria's been operating as if she has sole authority over a trust that was meant to be shared equally between two beneficiaries. What's our next step? I asked, feeling simultaneously vindicated and terrified by the implications. Amanda pulled out a yellow legal pad and began making notes. First, we request a complete accounting from the current trustee, which appears to be your Uncle Robert, though that's another irregularity we need to investigate. Second, we demand immediate access to all trust records, bank statements, and investment portfolios. Third, we put everyone on notice that unauthorized distributions must cease immediately. How do you think this happened? I asked. How did Victoria get away with this for so long? Family dynamics, Amanda replied grimly. Trust fraud often succeeds because family members don't want to appear greedy or confrontational. The wrongdoer counts on everyone being too polite or too uninformed to ask hard questions. Lisa handed me a preliminary calculation she'd been working on. Based on the foundation filings and assuming Victoria's been taking equal distributions for herself, we're looking at approximately $1.8 million in funds that should have been distributed to you over the past 5 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. $1.8 million. Enough to launch my consulting firm, buy a house, build the life I'd been dreaming about while accepting my family's narrative about my limited prospects. There's something else, Lisa continued, pulling up another document on her laptop. The trust includes a clause about investment growth. If the funds had been properly managed and distributed, your share would be worth significantly more due to compound growth. Amanda stood and walked to the window overlooking downtown Portland. Claire, I need you to understand what we're about to undertake. This isn't just a family disagreement. It's a legal action that will fundamentally change your relationships with everyone involved. Once we file these documents, there's no going back to Sunday dinners and polite conversation. I thought about Victoria's dismissive comments, about Uncle Robert's patronizing career advice, about years of feeling grateful for whatever small considerations they threw my way. Then I thought about the entrepreneurs I worked with, the clients who'd built something meaningful because they'd had access to the resources they needed to take risks. I understand, I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was committing to. I want to know the truth, whatever it costs. Amanda nodded and returned to her legal pad. Then, let's get started. Lisa, I want you to prepare a comprehensive asset trace. I'll draft the demand letters for immediate accounting and cessation of unauthorized distributions. Claire, you're going to need to document every instance where Victoria represented herself as having authority over trust matters. As I left Amanda's office 2 hours later, my briefcase heavy with legal documents and action items, I realized that the modest consulting business Victoria had dismissively called my little practice was about to fund the fight for my rightful inheritance. The irony was perfect. The competence I'd developed while being treated as the unsuccessful sister would now be the weapon I used to reclaim what had always been mine. The investigation had revealed the scope of the deception. Now came the harder part, confronting a family that had built their entire dynamic around a lie they'd been living for over 2 decades. The smoking gun arrived in my email at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, 3 weeks after Amanda had filed our formal request for trust accounting. I was reviewing quarterly reports for a sustainable packaging startup when my phone chimed with a message from Lisa, Amanda's paralegal. Check your email. Emergency. Call Amanda first thing tomorrow. Quote, The attachment was a PDF scan of handwritten notes, yellowed with age and bearing Uncle Robert's distinctive script. The header read, "Private Meeting Notes, Victoria Wellington, June 15, 2001. Below it, in careful bullet points, was the blueprint for 23 years of systematic deception. Victoria is extremely upset about trust amendment conditions. Claims college requirement is unfair given her learning differences. Suggests Claire doesn't need to know about changes until absolutely necessary. Proposed strategy. Continue distributions to V as if original 1998 structure still applies. Technical compliance can be addressed later when both girls are older and more mature." My hands trembled as I read further down the page. V's argument. Claire is too young to understand family financial complexity. Maintaining current arrangement protects family harmony. Margaret's true intent was always to provide for the more responsible granddaughter. Amendment conditions were added as formality, not genuine requirement. The next page contained even more damaging revelations. Agreed to facilitate interim distributions from principal to maintain V's lifestyle. Will establish separate accounting to track funds pending future resolution. Claire's eventual inheritance can be adjusted to reflect her lesser contributions to family obligations and charitable work. I sat in stunned silence, laptop screen casting blue light across my darkened apartment. This wasn't just financial fraud. It was a conspiracy that had shaped every interaction I'd had with my family for over 2 decades. Uncle Robert, the man I'd trusted as a father figure, had actively participated in denying me my legal inheritance, while allowing Victoria to live a life of luxury, funded by money that belonged to both of us. The timestamp on Lisa's email showed she'd sent it from the office at nearly midnight. Amanda's law firm was clearly treating this case with the urgency it deserved. I scrolled through the rest of the documents, each page revealing new layers of deliberate deception. Bank statements showed regular transfers from the Wellington Trust to Victoria's personal accounts, marked as, quote, interim distributions pending trust modification. The amounts were staggering, $50,000 quarterly payments that had continued uninterrupted since 2001. Over 23 years, these interim payments totaled nearly $4.7 million. But the most devastating discovery came in a series of emails between Victoria and Uncle Robert from 2019, just months after grandmother's death. From victoria.wellington@westwoodfinancial.com to robert.wellington@wellingtonlaw.com. Subject: Trust documentation. Robert, Claire has been asking more questions about her inheritance lately. I think she's getting ideas about starting her own business and expects family funding. We need to make sure she doesn't get access to the original trust documents. Can you handle the probate filing to minimize what becomes public record? From robert.wellington@wellingtonlaw.com to victoria.wellington@westwoodfinancial.com. Subject: RE, Trust documentation. Victoria, I've already filed the simplified probate schedule. The 2001 amendment won't appear in public records unless specifically requested. Given Claire's lack of legal sophistication, she's unlikely to know what to look for. Continue the current distribution schedule, and I'll handle any questions that arise. The cold calculation in their correspondence made my stomach turn. They'd been actively working to keep me ignorant of my rights, dismissing my intelligence as lack of legal sophistication, while systematically stealing millions of dollars that legally belonged to me. I called Amanda at 6:30 a.m., knowing she'd be awake and reviewing the same documents that had kept me up all night. Amanda, I just finished reading everything Lisa sent. This is worse than we thought. Much worse, Amanda agreed, her voice tight with professional anger. We're not just dealing with unauthorized distributions anymore. This is conspiracy to defraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and potentially criminal conversion of assets. Uncle Robert's notes prove intent and planning. What does this mean for our case? It means we have them dead to rights. The documented conspiracy, the falsified accounting, the deliberate concealment of your rights. Any judge will see this as textbook trust fraud. But Claire, there's something else we discovered. I braced myself for more revelations. Lisa ran the investment analysis on your rightful share of the trust. If the funds had been properly invested and distributed according to the original terms, your current inheritance should be worth approximately $8.3 million. The number hit me like a physical blow, $8.3 million. Not only had they stolen my past, they'd stolen my future. The compound growth that would have made me financially independent. The opportunities I could have pursued. The life I could have built. There's more, Amanda continued. The trust included what's called a bad faith penalty clause. When beneficiaries or trustees act in bad faith, they forfeit their own distributions and become personally liable for damages. If we can prove Victoria and Robert knew they were violating the trust terms, which these documents clearly show, Victoria could lose her entire inheritance. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, coffee forgotten as the full scope of the betrayal crystallized. They knew. From the beginning, they knew they were stealing from me. The evidence is unambiguous. Victoria never met the education requirements of the 2001 amendment. She dropped out of college 3 times and never completed a degree. Uncle Robert documented her failure to meet the trust conditions, then helped her circumvent them anyway. That afternoon, I drove to my office but couldn't concentrate on client work. The marketing director from a renewable energy startup called twice about optimization strategies, but I found myself staring at spreadsheets without processing the information. My entire understanding of my family, my place in the world, my financial limitations, everything had been built on deliberate lies. I pulled up Victoria's LinkedIn profile, studying the professional image she'd crafted over the years. Investment advisor, Westwood Financial Group, Stanford University. The Stanford reference had always intimidated me, made me feel like the less accomplished sister despite my own MBA from the same institution. But now I saw it for what it was. Another lie. She'd never graduated from Stanford. She'd never graduated from anywhere. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Family dinner Sunday as usual. Uncle Robert wants to discuss the foundation's holiday fundraiser. Your input would be valuable. The casual tone, the assumption that I'd participate in their charade while they actively worked to rob me, the audacity was breathtaking. I screenshotted the message for Amanda's files and deleted it without responding. That evening, I video called my parents in Singapore. The 12-hour time difference meant catching them at breakfast, and seeing their familiar faces on my laptop screen brought an unexpected wave of emotion. "Claire, darling, you look tired," my mother observed, her diplomat's training evident in the careful way she assessed my appearance. "Is everything all right?" I'd prepared for this conversation, knowing I needed allies and witnesses for what was coming. "I need to tell you both something important about the family trust. I've discovered some irregularities that require legal attention." My father's expression sharpened. Even at 70, his mind remained razor-sharp from decades of international negotiations. "What kind of irregularities?" I chose my words carefully, aware that this conversation would likely be referenced in future legal proceedings. Victoria has been receiving distributions from the trust without meeting the legal requirements established in the 2001 amendment. Uncle Robert has been facilitating unauthorized transfers that violate grandmother's specific instructions. The silence stretched across the Pacific Connection before my mother spoke. "Claire, are you certain about this? These are very serious allegations." "I have documentation, bank records, email correspondence, handwritten notes from Uncle Robert planning the deception. They've been stealing from me for 23 years. My father leaned forward, his diplomatic composure giving way to parental concern. "What do you need from us?" "I need you to know the truth before this becomes public. I need you to understand that I didn't choose this fight. I'm simply reclaiming what was always legally mine." After ending the call, I sat in my apartment as night fell over Portland, city lights twinkling like stars beyond my windows. Tomorrow, Amanda would file our formal complaint seeking immediate cessation of all unauthorized distributions, full accounting of trust assets, and personal liability for Victoria and Uncle Robert. The revelation was complete. I now understood not just what had been done to me, but how deliberately and systematically it had been orchestrated. The family dinners, the subtle put-downs, the careful maintenance of my lesser status, all of it had been designed to keep me from questioning an arrangement that had no legal foundation. But knowledge brought power. For the first time since childhood, I felt like I was seeing clearly, understanding the true dynamics that had shaped my entire adult life. The modest consulting practice they'd dismissed was about to fund a legal war that would expose every lie they'd built their lives around. The scared, grateful granddaughter who'd accepted whatever crumbs fell from the family table was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who knew exactly what she was worth, exactly what had been stolen from her, and exactly how to get it back. The process server arrived at Victoria's investment firm at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, walking past the marble reception desk and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased downtown Portland's financial district. I wasn't there to witness it, but Amanda had arranged for courthouse records to document the exact moment Victoria Wellington received formal notice that her 23-year deception was over. I was in my office, consulting with a biotech startup about supply chain optimization, when my phone lit up with the first indication that our legal bombardment had found its target. 7 missed calls from Uncle Robert in the span of 12 minutes, followed by a text that read simply, "We need to talk. Immediately." The formal complaint Amanda had filed was a masterpiece of legal precision, 47 pages documenting every violation, every unauthorized distribution, every breach of fiduciary duty spanning more than 2 decades. But beyond the legal language lay something more powerful, irrefutable evidence that the Wellington family hierarchy I'd accepted my entire life was built on fraud. "The response has been swift," Amanda reported when I arrived at her office that evening. "Your uncle's attorney called 6 times today requesting an emergency meeting. Victoria's lawyer has already reached out about potential settlement discussions. They know exactly how damaging this evidence is." Amanda's conference room had been transformed into a command center. Whiteboards covered with timeline charts, financial projections, and legal strategies filled every available wall space. Lisa sat at her laptop, monitoring electronic filings and documenting each response from the opposing legal teams. "What's our strategy going forward?" I asked, settling into the chair that had become my regular spot during these war room sessions. "Multi-pronged approach," Amanda replied, turning to a detailed flowchart she'd created. "First, we filed for emergency injunctive relief to freeze all trust assets pending resolution. Victoria can't make any more unauthorized distributions while the case is active. Second, we've demanded immediate forensic accounting of all trust transactions since 2001. Third, we're pursuing personal liability against both Victoria and Uncle Robert for breach of fiduciary duty." Lisa looked up from her computer screen. "The asset freeze was granted this morning. Judge Martinez signed the temporary restraining order after reviewing our evidence package. Effective immediately, all Wellington Trust accounts are frozen, except for legitimate administrative expenses." The satisfaction I felt was cold and precise, like a surgical procedure correcting years of damage. Victoria's luxury lifestyle, funded by my stolen inheritance, had just come to an abrupt halt. "There's more," Amanda continued. "We've also filed complaints with the Oregon State Bar regarding Uncle Robert's conduct. Attorneys have ethical obligations when serving as trustees, and his documented conspiracy to defraud a beneficiary constitutes serious professional misconduct." My phone buzzed with another call from Uncle Robert. I let it go to voicemail, knowing that anything he said now would be carefully scripted by his legal team, rather than the honest conversation he'd avoided for 23 years. The next morning brought the first sign of their desperation. Mrs. Patterson called my office, her voice shaky with distress I'd never heard from the woman who'd been our family's steadying presence for 3 decades. "Miss Claire, I'm so sorry to bother you at work, but your uncle is here asking for your contact information. He seems quite upset, and Victoria has been calling the house repeatedly. I didn't know what to tell them." "Mrs. Patterson, you don't need to tell them anything," I said gently. "If they want to communicate with me, they can do so through my attorney. Here's her number." By afternoon, the media had picked up the story. "Wellington heiress claims trust fraud" appeared in the Portland Business Journal, followed by a more detailed piece in the Oregonian that included quotes from estate planning attorneys about the complexity of multi-generational trust disputes. My phone began ringing with calls from reporters, financial advisors, and curious acquaintances who'd seen my name in the news. I declined all interview requests, following Amanda's advice to let the legal documents speak for themselves. But privately, I felt vindicated by the public attention. For years, I'd been treated as the unsuccessful Wellington sister, the one who couldn't quite measure up to family expectations. Now, those same society pages that had featured Victoria's charitable work were documenting her systematic theft from her own family. The counterattack began Thursday morning. Victoria's legal team filed a motion claiming I was pursuing a frivolous lawsuit motivated by jealousy and financial desperation. Their response painted me as an opportunistic sister, trying to capitalize on complex family finances I didn't understand. They're playing character assassination, Amanda explained as we reviewed their filing. It's a common strategy when the facts are indefensible. They can't dispute the documentary evidence, so they're trying to make this about your motivations rather than their actions. Uncle Robert's response was more sophisticated, but equally desperate. His attorneys argued that the 2001 amendment had been intended as temporary guidance, not permanent restriction, and that his actions as trustee had been reasonable interpretations of ambiguous language designed to protect family harmony. Ambiguous language, I repeated, reading through his legal justification. There was nothing ambiguous about systematic theft documented in his own handwriting. Lisa had been working overtime to trace the financial impact of their deception, and her analysis revealed layers of damage I hadn't initially considered. Beyond the direct distributions, we need to account for opportunity costs, she explained, pointing to spreadsheets that made my head spin. The money they took from you wasn't just sitting in savings accounts. It should have been invested and growing. The investment analysis showed that my rightful inheritance, properly managed, would have generated returns that funded Victoria's entire lifestyle while still preserving principal for future generations. Instead, they'd been spending both my principal and the growth that should have compounded over 2 decades. We're also pursuing recovery of what's called unjust enrichment, Amanda added. Victoria received benefits she wasn't entitled to, and those benefits came directly from assets that belong to you. Every luxury vacation, every designer purchase, every charitable donation she made to enhance her social standing, all of it was funded by your stolen money. By Friday, the legal momentum had shifted decisively in our favor. Judge Martinez granted our motion for expedited discovery, ordering Victoria and Uncle Robert to produce complete financial records within 30 days, rather than the standard 90. More importantly, she scheduled an emergency hearing for the following week to address our request for immediate restitution. Emergency hearings are unusual in trust cases, Amanda explained as we prepared for court. But Judge Martinez clearly recognizes the egregious nature of the violations. The documented conspiracy, the systematic concealment, the personal enrichment at your expense. This isn't typical family dispute territory. The weekend brought an unexpected development. My parents called from Singapore, their voices tight, with the kind of diplomatic tension I remembered from childhood, when international crises required their immediate attention. Claire, we've been contacted by reporters asking for comment about the family situation, my mother said carefully. We wanted you to know that we've retained our own attorney to review the trust documents independently. Are you taking sides? I asked, though I appreciated their methodical approach to crisis management. We're taking the side of the truth, my father replied. If these allegations are accurate, if Victoria and Robert have been systematically violating your grandmother's wishes, then we support your legal action completely. But we needed independent verification before making public statements. Their support meant more than I'd expected. For years, I'd felt like the family outlier, the one who couldn't quite fit into the established Wellington social structure. Learning that my parents were willing to challenge that structure when presented with evidence of fraud gave me confidence that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Sunday evening, as I prepared for the emergency hearing that would determine immediate relief, Amanda called with news that changed everything. Victoria's attorney just contacted us about settlement discussions. They want to meet tomorrow before the hearing to discuss terms. What kind of terms? Full restitution, transfer of distribution authority, public acknowledgement of the violations. Claire, they know they've lost. The question now isn't whether you'll win. It's how much you'll recover and how quickly. I stood at my apartment window, looking out over the Portland skyline where Victoria's investment firm occupied premium real estate bought with money that should have been mine. Tomorrow, the family dynamic that had governed my entire adult life would be permanently altered. The scared, grateful granddaughter, who'd accepted whatever considerations they offered, would walk into that courtroom as an equal partner in a multi-million-dollar trust. The legal machinery I'd set in motion was now operating with the precision and force that comes from overwhelming evidence and righteous anger. Victoria's world of luxury and false superiority was crumbling under the weight of documented truth, while mine was expanding into possibilities I'd never dared imagine. The response phase was complete. Now came the reckoning. The settlement meeting took place in the neutral territory of a conference room at the Multnomah Athletic Club, where mahogany panels and oil paintings of long-dead Portland industrialists provided an appropriately somber backdrop for the collapse of Victoria's carefully constructed empire. I arrived with Amanda at precisely 9 a.m., briefcase containing the evidence that had already destroyed any hope of Victoria maintaining her innocence. Victoria sat across the polished table looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, her usual designer armor replaced by a conservative navy suit that seemed to diminish rather than enhance her presence. The confident woman who'd spent years dismissing my ambitions had been replaced by someone who couldn't quite meet my eyes. Uncle Robert occupied the chair beside her, his 72 years suddenly visible in the deep lines around his mouth and the way his hands trembled as he reviewed documents. Their lead attorney, Harrison Blackwell, from Portland's most prestigious white shoe firm, wasted no time with pleasantries. My clients are prepared to discuss resolution terms that acknowledge certain irregularities in trust administration while avoiding the publicity and expense of prolonged litigation. Amanda's response was ice-cold precision. Mr. Blackwell, we're not here to discuss irregularities. We're here to address systematic fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and breach of fiduciary duties spanning 23 years. Your clients don't get to characterize decades of deliberate theft as administrative oversight. I watched Victoria flinch at the word theft, but felt no sympathy for her discomfort. This was the same woman who'd told me I deserved nothing, who'd spent my inheritance while lecturing me about accepting my limitations. What are your client's demands? Uncle Robert's attorney asked, his voice strained. Amanda slid a document across the table. Complete restitution of all unauthorized distributions plus compound interest calculated at market rates. Transfer of full distribution authority to Ms. Wellington effective immediately. Public acknowledgement of the violations and Ms. Wellington's rightful position as co-beneficiary. Personal liability for damages resulting from the conspiracy. Blackwell's eyes widened as he scanned the numbers. You're seeking $12.7 million in total damages? Conservative estimate, Amanda replied. Our forensic accountant calculated opportunity costs based on average trust portfolio performance. Had the funds been properly invested instead of spent on luxury items, the current value would be substantially higher. Victoria finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire, we can work this out as a family. There's no need to destroy relationships over money. The audacity of her statement, attempting to frame decades of theft as a family disagreement, crystallized every emotion I'd been processing for weeks. Victoria, you spent 23 years systematically stealing from me while making me feel grateful for whatever scraps you allowed me to have. You forfeited the right to family consideration when you conspired to rob me. Uncle Robert leaned forward, attempting to reclaim some authority. Claire, you have to understand the complexities involved. The trust language was ambiguous, and we made decisions we believed served the family's best interests. I pulled out my own copy of his handwritten notes from 2001, the smoking gun that had exposed their conspiracy. Uncle Robert, your own documentation proves you knew exactly what you were doing. Technical compliance can be addressed later, and, quote, Claire's eventual inheritance can be adjusted to reflect her lesser contributions. Those aren't the words of someone confused by ambiguous language. The color drained from his face as he recognized his own handwriting. Blackwell quickly intervened. We're prepared to discuss substantial restitution, but the amounts you're seeking would bankrupt both defendants. Then they should have considered that before spending money that wasn't theirs, I replied, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. The negotiations stretched through the morning, with Victoria's team desperately trying to reduce the financial impact, while Amanda methodically documented why each dollar had been calculated correctly. During a break, I overheard Victoria on her phone with someone discussing liquidating her investment accounts and putting her house on the market. When we reconvened, Blackwell's demeanor had shifted from confident negotiation to damage control. My clients accept responsibility for administrative errors and are prepared to make substantial restitution. However, we need to structure payments over time to avoid forcing immediate bankruptcy. Administrative errors, Amanda repeated, her tone suggesting she'd heard enough euphemisms for one day. Mr. Blackwell, Judge Martinez has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. We can either reach agreement today, or we can let the court decide appropriate remedies for documented conspiracy and fraud. I should mention that criminal referrals are also being considered. The mention of criminal charges had the intended effect. Victoria's attorney requested another private consultation, and when they returned, Blackwell's opening statement indicated complete capitulation. My clients agree to full restitution as calculated, structured as an immediate payment of $8.5 million plus transfer of Victoria's current trust principal balance of $3.2 million. Uncle Robert will resign as trustee immediately, with distribution authority transferring to Claire Wellington. All parties will sign public acknowledgement of the violations. I felt Amanda's hand briefly touch my arm under the table. Victory, delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. But Victoria wasn't finished. As we finalized terms, she made one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her carefully constructed life. Claire, I want you to know this was never personal. We genuinely believed we were protecting family assets and maintaining stability. The lie was so brazen, so completely disconnected from the evidence we'd uncovered, that I felt compelled to respond. Victoria, I found emails where you discussed manipulating me into feeling grateful for whatever small considerations you provided. You actively worked to keep me ignorant of my rights while spending millions of dollars that belonged to me. That's not protection, that's predatory behavior. She turned away, unable to maintain the pretense any longer. The final settlement documents were signed at 4:17 p.m., officially ending the Wellington family trust fraud and beginning my new life as the rightful heir to my grandmother's legacy. As we gathered our papers, Uncle Robert made one last attempt at reconciliation. Claire, I hope someday you'll understand that everything we did was motivated by concern for family unity. I looked at the man who'd been a father figure throughout my childhood, who'd taught me to ride horses and helped with college applications, who'd simultaneously been planning and executing a decades-long conspiracy to rob me of my inheritance. Uncle Robert, family unity built on lies and theft isn't unity, it's manipulation. You had 23 years to do the right thing. You chose deception every single day. Walking out of the club into the crisp October afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood: complete financial security. The consulting business I'd built while believing I was limited by modest resources would now be funded by the inheritance that had always been mine. The dreams I'd deferred, the opportunities I'd declined, the risks I'd been too afraid to take, all of that was changing. Amanda walked beside me toward the parking garage, her satisfaction evident despite her professional composure. Claire, in 20 years of practice, I've never seen such complete documentation of trust fraud. Your meticulous record-keeping and willingness to pursue the truth made this case unwinnable for them. What happens now? Now you rebuild your life with the resources you should have had all along. The consulting firm you've been planning, the investments you couldn't make, the independence you've earned, all of it becomes possible. That evening, as I reviewed the settlement documents in my apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother in Singapore. Your father and I are proud of your courage. Justice has been served. The scared, grateful granddaughter who'd accepted whatever considerations her family provided was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who'd fought for her rights and won, who'd exposed decades of deception and reclaimed what had always belonged to her. Tomorrow, I would begin building the life I'd always been meant to live, funded by resources that had been stolen from me but never truly lost. The Wellington name would finally represent what it was meant to represent, not the privilege of theft, but the power of truth. 6 months later, I stood in the corner office of Wellington Strategic Solutions, watching the morning sun cast golden light across the Willamette River, through floor-to-ceiling windows that had cost more than my previous annual rent. The irony wasn't lost on me. I now occupied a space 3 floors above Victoria's former investment firm, in the same building where she'd once held court as Portland's financial elite. My assistant knocked gently before entering. Ms. Wellington, your 10 a.m. is here. Marcus Chen from TechFlow Solutions. Marcus walked in with the nervous energy I remembered from our early consulting days, but now he carried himself with the confidence of someone whose company had grown from bleeding money to profitable powerhouse. Claire, I still can't believe this is your office. When you said you were expanding Wellington Strategic, I didn't expect this. I gestured toward the seating area where we'd conducted dozens of strategy sessions when I was working from shared office space, and he was desperate to save his failing startup. Success looks different when you have the resources to match your vision. The company I'd built over the past 6 months bore little resemblance to my modest consulting practice. Wellington Strategic Solutions now employed 12 full-time consultants, occupied an entire floor of Portland's premier business tower, and maintained a client waitlist that stretched months into the future. The capital I'd recovered from the trust settlement had allowed me to recruit top talent, invest in cutting-edge analytical tools, and take on projects that required substantial upfront resources. Your proposal for our expansion into sustainable packaging is exactly what we needed, Marcus continued, reviewing the comprehensive strategy document my team had prepared. The integration timeline, the supplier optimization, the environmental impact projections, this is enterprise-level consulting. After Marcus left, I reviewed the afternoon schedule with Rachel, my director of operations, a brilliant former McKinsey consultant who joined us when I could finally offer competitive compensation packages. Our client roster now included Fortune 500 companies seeking sustainable operational transformations, tech unicorns preparing for IPO launches, and innovative startups whose founders knew that proper operational foundation determined long-term success. The business plan I'd refined in secret for years had become reality, funded by the inheritance that had always been mine, but systematically stolen by family members, who'd spent decades convincing me I deserved less. The consulting expertise I'd developed while accepting their narrative of my limitations now generated revenue that exceeded Victoria's former investment advisory practice. At 3 p.m., I drove to the community center in Southeast Portland, where I'd been conducting pro bono workshops for women rebuilding their lives after financial abuse. Today's session focused on recognizing manipulation tactics and establishing financial independence, lessons I'd learned the hard way but could now share with others facing similar challenges. Trust your instincts, I told the group of 15 women whose stories echoed my own in different variations. When someone consistently makes you feel small, when they control access to resources that should be yours, when they discourage your ambitions while benefiting from your compliance, those are red flags, not family dynamics. Sarah, a recent divorce survivor, raised her hand. But what if they're family? What if challenging them means losing relationships you've had your whole life? Then you have to decide whether those relationships were ever real, I replied, thinking of Sunday dinners where I'd performed gratitude while my inheritance was being stolen. People who genuinely care about you want to see you succeed. They don't work systematically to keep you dependent and grateful. After the workshop, I drove through the neighborhoods where I'd grown up, past the elementary school where Victoria and I had played together as children, before trust funds and inheritance law created the hierarchy that governed our adult relationship. The little girl who'd looked up to her older sister could never have imagined that the same sister would spend decades orchestrating a conspiracy to rob her of financial security. My phone buzzed with a text from my parents, now back in Portland after completing their diplomatic assignment. Dinner Sunday? We'd love to see your new office and hear about the expansion plans. The invitation represented something I'd never expected: family relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial hierarchy. My parents' independent investigation had confirmed every detail of Victoria's fraud, leading them to cut contact with both her and Uncle Robert. Their support during the legal proceedings had been unwavering, but more importantly, they now treated me as an equal rather than the family member who needed guidance and protection. Victoria herself had disappeared from Portland's social scene entirely. The house in West Hills had been sold to fund the settlement, her investment advisory practice had dissolved amid client defections, and she'd reportedly moved to Spokane, where the cost of living matched her dramatically reduced circumstances. Uncle Robert had surrendered his law license rather than face disciplinary proceedings, retiring in disgrace to a modest apartment near the coast. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only relief that the systematic deception had finally ended. The energy I'd once spent feeling inadequate compared to Victoria's apparent success now fueled business strategies and mentorship programs that created genuine value for others. As evening approached, I stood on my apartment balcony, a penthouse overlooking the river that represented freedom rather than luxury, and reflected on the journey from discovering Uncle Robert's handwritten conspiracy notes to building a consulting empire that honored my grandmother's entrepreneurial legacy. The scared young woman who'd accepted whatever considerations her family provided had been replaced by someone who knew exactly what she was worth and refused to settle for less. The business acumen I'd developed while believing I was limited by modest resources had flourished when given proper capital and support. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that family isn't defined by blood relations or inherited obligations. The colleagues who'd supported me during the legal battle, the clients who trusted my expertise when I was still building credibility, the women in my workshops who shared their stories of survival and transformation, these relationships were built on mutual respect and genuine care, rather than manipulation and dependency. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, potential acquisition offers from larger consulting firms, expansion opportunities into additional markets, decisions about whether to take Wellington Strategic public or maintain our current independence. But tonight, I simply stood in the space I'd created through courage and competence, watching the city lights reflect on the water, and knowing that I'd finally claimed the life that had always been mine by right. The girl who'd been told she deserved nothing had discovered she deserved everything, and more importantly, she'd learned to fight for it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.